Hello. Welcome to Jordan Sorcery's GW Books Club, where we're reading through the original fiction published by Games Workshop between 1989 and 1991. This month, we read Demon Download, the first full-length novel set in the Dark Future universe, written by Kim Newman under his pseudonym Jack Yeovil. Before my good friend Stu and I get into our discussion, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the story of the book. The United States Cavalry is one of the few functioning arms of the US government in the dark future that is 1999. Responsible for protecting the interests of the corps out in the no-go zones, the US Cav are heavily equipped and well-resourced, but they just lost a couple of those resources and don't even realise it yet. One of their patrols has been brought to a violent, abrupt halt with only one survivor, Trooper Nathan Stack. Whilst refueling at a gas stop, Stack and his team were attacked by a computer program, or perhaps a viral demon, that took over their high-tech US Cav-issued vehicle and turned their own armory against them, before driving itself deeper into the no-go zone. Intent on finding out what has happened and stopping it from happening again, Stack follows the car to the frontier town of Welcome, Arizona, where he discovers a trail of carnage, a dead priest, and the remnants of the car. At the same time, a mysterious operative called Chantal Giroux has been sent from the Vatican with diplomatic papers to help the US Cavalry out. Whilst Chantal heads out to Welcome to team up with Stack, the demon in the machine makes its way to Fort Apache, the home base of the USC in this region, and with it comes a trail of horror movie massacres, panic, and paranoia. Eventually, Chantal and Stack work out where the demon is going and what it wants, and in a final confrontation at the fort, they are able to exorcise it from the Apache systems and force it to possess the body of a double agent in the cavalry's ranks. It all comes down to a brutal fight to the death, with Chantal coming out on top and the collateral damage leaving the survivors at the fort reeling. Okay, Stu, so we are talking about Demon Download, the very first novel set in Dark Future. This is Jack Yeovil, so Kim Newman writing under his pseudonym. We've read a load of his Warhammer Fantasy books already and some of his short stories, even a short story set in Dark Future that he's written in the Route 666 anthology. But this is the first time we get the real, unfiltered Jack Yeovil Dark Future world. How was it for you? How did it start and how did it end for you?
I loved it, to be honest with you. It's really good. And I'll say right at the start of this to sort of spoil the end a bit, but for me, it's right up there as a potential best book out of the series we've done so far.
Ooh, wow.
And yeah, as a novel, if we separate some of the short stories out, so I really liked it.
Yeah,
I find it hard to compare with Genevieve because one's a Warhammer novel, this is different. It's a different genre.
sure.
Which it feels unfair to compare it, but I really like this style anyway. I think when we talked about Route 666 last time, I said how much I like that kind of the feel anyway. I just feel at home with that kind of stuff. And for this, for me, I said it last time, but it's Stephen King meets Blade Runner and Mad Max. As if Stephen King wrote Blade Runner stroke Mad Max, and I love Stephen King, so that's a good thing. And I love those films. So I just feel at home in this world, whether it's Dark Future or didn't have that branding. I feel I know it. I feel I know that America is from the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s film. And I love that post-apocalyptic kind of feel to it and the humor in it that's underlying all the way through. We were just talking before you press record that how Ken Dodd appears as a throwaway line when they're talking about news and background, and you've got these famous people, and then Ken Dodd, what did he say, his third goodbye concert or something like that.
Yeah.
He's clearly this Ken Dodd in this world. And people who don't know, there might be people who watching this who don't know Ken Dodd as well. Google him. You will be surprised. But in this story, he's this clearly this amazing music artist that's that's world famous. But I love all of that kind of humor in it, and it's filtered throughout. But I liked it. I thought a lot.
Yeah,
a lot going on in this story, but a lot I really like about it.
Yeah, I could see that, and I think, I mean, that's high praise to say that it might be near the top for you. I think this it does have that same propulsive energy of a Drachenfels, right?
Yeah.
Because of the way that Kim Newman was writing, and knowing now that he was doing these things, he was writing these entire novels in like 3 weeks, and he was just smashing through it. The structure and the way it's written, as in literally every chapter is broken down into smaller sections. So you have these so there's almost vignettes of like, okay, what's this character up to? What's this character up to?
Yeah.
What's happening over here? That lends itself, I think, in his writing, in his actual writing style, that lends it to being quicker, I imagine, to be able to
Yeah.
progress a novel in that way.
Yeah.
But that also, as a reader, just makes it really quick and easy and compelling because you are constantly jumping from place to place, just getting that next little morsel of, what's happening, what's the excitement, what's the cliffhanger, and then you're jumping somewhere else and going somewhere else. So in terms of its sort of structure and form, it's great. It really works super well. And then content-wise, like you say, he's managed to marry a lot of these different influences that were there in Dark Future, the game, and which we sort of saw little samples of in the anthology. I would say the anthology leans more into the Mad Max side of things than anything else. In fact, I called out one of the more sort of 2000 AD or perhaps Blade Runner-y sort of cyberpunky kind of stories. Felt quite out of place when you put it alongside all of the others in Route 666. But this novel, I think, does a much better job of saying, no, actually, that story does make sense in this world because the world is slightly different to how I certainly had interpreted it from the base game and that anthology.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think if you look at it through the perspective for the game first, then sure, that's it. And I think, like, my one of my favorite stories in the anthology was one of your least favorite stories, and for me, it's always all fit because there's always something recognizable from all of this kind of fiction or game content or comic content or film content. It feels like they could all be rolled in because you have a slightly changed real world that quite often has a bit of an 80s tint to it or feel to it because it felt like that's where I was first became aware of those, or late 80s, 90s. At least I think that can, for me, it just fits all the way through. So you talked about the way the way it's laid out in the book kind of switches between different characters and different places and locations. And that just goes back to what Kim Newman does very, very well, which is making his stories like a film. It feels like you're reading a film.
Yeah.
And it just works so much better. And because it's an 80s Mad Max stroke Total Recall stroke whatever it happens to be kind of film, it just works even better because with that added element of the supernatural, which feels like it could be a Stephen King story as well, or at least an idea, not the style. So I mentioned Stephen King, it's not his writing style, but it's the kind of, if you wrote a synopsis for a Stephen King storyline, the demon side of things could very much be something that he'd written. And if you read any of the Dark Tower series, that swaps and changes with different time periods and all kinds of things, but you could see how some of that might fit with some of this as well. It could almost be the same world pushed further on at times. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
I think there's so much room to do what you want with it, really. As long as you keep some of the constants there, you're fine. You can pretty much do what you want.
Yeah. Because Kim Newman, when I interviewed him earlier this year, he'd sort of joked about the fact that Dark Future, because it drew on these different influences, it was almost irreconcilable because you had Blade Runner and that, ultra high-tech, cyberpunky sort of cityscape at the same time as the dust-strewn roads of Mad Max. And those things were quite difficult. And I suppose you see that in 2000 AD and Mega City 1 versus the Cursed Earth. But it's tough to bring those worlds together. And I think that this does a really good job of
Mhm.
showing, okay, how are there these super high tech areas of the world in America, especially post all of the devastation that Dark Future has seen happen in America?
Yeah.
How have you got that and the mega corporations and the proper, Gibson cyberpunk stuff and all of that kind of thing happening at the same time as there's just like Mad Max guys driving around fighting gangs and having proper wars out in the wastelands?
I've got a theory of why it works.
Okay,
And I
yeah.
think because of the lens, obviously the time it was written, but the lens that you see the tech through is that late 80s, early 90s
Yes,
TV film view of what tech would be.
sure.
So it's almost low tech, high tech, isn't it? We
Yes,
can
it is.
we
Yeah.
can travel to different galaxies, but it's a bit like 40K with that, but your monitor might still be a green screen.
Yeah,
It's
like in
kind of this
Alien.
because they haven't really worked out. People
Yeah.
haven't really. The imagination is about the bigger things rather than the way technology is actually advanced. It's
Sure.
the smaller things. So we can't travel to Mars, but we've got 4K tablets and we
you
can
can have
see,
video
we're
calls.
talking here on Zoom
Yeah,
and far higher tech than you'd see in these things, but they can also do more.
yeah,
So I think that kind of almost has like a filter or a gradient which enables those two universes to exist in the same place.
yeah. I think you're right,
I mean,
actually. Yeah,
like Chantal's car is
sure.
incredibly high tech.
Yeah,
And talks to her. I mean, this is a time where Knight Rider was on the television,
yes,
I imagine, as well. So Frederico is Kit.
yes. Yeah.
Just maybe more sassy, maybe not. I don't know, but it's tech that it's high tech. Of course, it is. We don't have what do we have? We've got Tesla now, but that's a fairly new thing. But I don't know. It feels like that would be a completely acceptable idea of what cars might be like in the future.
Mm.
Do they actually do anymore? Not really, but they just maybe it talks and I don't know. It works. It just works for me. I don't question it at all.
It does work. Yeah, and then
feels at home.
the setup itself is a really interesting one and takes the world into a really interesting place, which I'd not really expected. Obviously, we got a touch of this kind of eldritch, Lovecraftian horror in just the one Jackie Oville story that was in Route 666. But everything else was a lot more mundane in its in its execution. It was just guns and ammo, or the magazine that they talk about, Guns and Killing magazine, right? That is what the other stories were all about, except for that one that had Elder Seth and the summoning of demons. And this story picks up directly from that. I think we move forward 10 or 15 years, something like that. And Elder Seth has now established his Josephite sort of state, essentially, and there's he whatever deals he's done with demons and devils, it's paid off, and now they're recruiting more people. One of the things that they're then doing is they're going to actually summon what is pretty explicitly a real demon and put it into the technology, and it's going to get into what was this different interpretation of the internet, and then it's going to wreak havoc and it's going to destroy what's left of America, basically. And we then have a couple of characters who, for various reasons, are going about their business, trying to stop it in different ways, and they sort of team up towards the end. So you get it's wild. There's an actual like demon in the system, the ghost in the machine, and it's very literal, and it's kind of explained, and sort of it's really interesting. I mean, what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts on the demon that is in this story, like how that works?
I think I find it quite entertaining. I like the fact that it was using the technology. It's different, isn't it? It's different than just possessing people. It's quite, I don't know, because it builds quite slowly. It feels quite cheeky and like it's enjoying itself, isn't it? And you learn more about the demon later on. You learn that it's actually in the grand scope of demons is actually probably quite a small and less powerful one in hell. There's not one of these big greatest demons kind of things. But in this world, it becomes more powerful because of the context of which it's using its power. But
Mm.
I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was a unique way of doing it. So it brings in that tech side with the more Stephen King-esque
Yeah.
kind of sort of supernatural style of thing. I think it molds it really well together.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they
Reminded me
might
a
bash
bit
up
of
against you a little bit. If it was a person that was, I mean, at the end maybe there is, but on the whole, if it was people or physical demons that you could see,
mm,
it would feel more like other stories. So whether it's Stephen King or whether it's Constantine or something like that, which I love, by the way, but this kind of it because it's infecting the tech, it almost makes it dark future. If that makes sense. Or
yeah,
it
there's
gives it
something
this
very interesting about
uniqueness.
it. Yeah, and the thing that it reminded me a bit of was Lawnmower Man in
Okay,
its
yeah,
because of the way that this sort of technology gone evil and how
yeah,
that might
wow,
be
yeah,
exploited. But then there's all, as you mentioned before, we're watching or we're reading a movie essentially as
mm,
it's sort of playing out. But that's in classic Kim Newman style, is riffing on so many other films. There's so many pop cultural references. There's
yeah,
clearly so many things that it's almost like he must have been watching it in the background. He had it on TV
yeah,
whilst he was writing the script. But yeah, I mean, Christine, of course, you mentioned the King stuff. It
yeah.
it wasn't out then, but it brought to mind for me Rubber, the horror movie about the
Uh-huh.
first tire. So and that obviously would come much later, but it just sort of speaks to me about how this is a very kind of cinematic approach to Dark Future.
Yeah,
And yeah, exploring the technology and the intersection of religion and demons and tech is
yeah,
quite cool and still feels quite fresh and original. What does
yeah,
not feel that original or fresh anymore, I guess, is the way in which the demons spoke. It is a very retro sort of, like yo daddy o sort of
yeah.
like, and I think it's on purpose.
Mm.
He is this very cheesy kind of character. But yeah, I thought that it must have already been dated at the time, and it's only further dated that kind of dialogue for me.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's probably the most Stephen King like bit about it. Is that
Right.
is the way, yeah, because King often uses. I wouldn't know how to explain it very well, but he often uses kind of repetitive phrasing like that to
Mm,
really kind of give character to something. But yeah, yeah. But again, I think that's, yeah, like, it's definitely deliberate, and it's to make the
mm.
demon out to be cheeky and also give it a personality, I suppose.
Yeah,
It's because you either go for the kind of the more traditional kind of deep and scary kind of things, but that would almost feel out of place based
mm,
on what's going on, because the whole world is so tongue in cheek, isn't it? All of the what would have been satirical references at the time, where there are people from news at the time the book was written find themselves either as, future rock stars bigger than the Rolling Stones when they were a relatively small UK stand-up comic with a duster, or whether it's disgraced politicians finding themselves in bigger roles
yeah.
in this world, or
That's
or
really funny.
more
Yeah.
more actors that wasn't Ian Paisley mentioned as a prime
Yeah,
minister
but
at some point?
basically
That's interesting.
every leader that's ever mentioned in the book is always from, either disgraced or
Or or a film star.
yeah, there's definitely like he's having fun with just like let's take the kind of what people not everyone, but I'm guessing a lot of people would consider most of the politicians who were mentioned to be dodgy or
Yeah.
shady or the worst timeline, I guess. And
Yes.
but it's all of them. It's everyone's a Nixon. Every country's led by their Nixon equivalent.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
Including
funny.
Nixon, I
Yes,
think.
including Nixon himself. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do. I love it. It really makes me chuckle. And I think I mentioned when we recorded the last one, that I wonder whether someone younger than me would enjoy the story, but miss just some of those parts just because they're not as familiar with those
I think
names. Because I
so.
was
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
growing up and hearing them mentioned on the news.
Yes.
And when this was written, I would have only been 11, 12 or something like that.
I'm
So
pretty confident there'll be stuff that I've missed for sure because we're not reading it in that context anymore,
yes,
like you say.
yeah,
And there's things that I picked up on, and we're like, okay, I get that reference, but there were many things where I didn't get the reference. It felt like there was something being referred to, but I
yeah.
wasn't close enough to it to
And
acknowledge it.
I was a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old that did watch the news a bit as well.
Right.
Sorry, I'm that kind of guy. But but again, if you're like a lot of kids, you just don't take any notice of the news until you're maybe in your 20s or
Just
30s or even
names,
older.
right? You
just might not
recognize the
even
name.
get who they are. So I think if you are aware a little bit of the news, especially late 80s, late 80s newsworthy stuff, then you'll be chuckling away. If you're a fan of Spitting Image, you'll probably be chuckling away at some of the people that were picked up on. But I love it. I think it's really fun.
There was so the sort of initial encounter with the demon is it takes over a gas station, and then from that it gets into one of the US cavalry cruisers, which are actually quite high tech, relatively speaking. And then there is some really it's proper horror movie stuff where the car, all of the armaments in the car are then employed to take out the 4 or 5 characters who are around at the time. And that included one of the characters, so Leona Tyree, who was one of the survivors of Route 666, who I absolutely, and I think this was a really good bit of like red herring, thought she was going to be our main character for this story. Yeah. And then she's taken out almost at the start in this very like horror movie sequence that was really quite gruesome, but really
there's
well
a lot
written.
Of gruesomeness in the book.
Oh, there's loads of gruesome stuff throughout. But that sort of set the tone because that happens early enough that it's like, okay, wow, everything's up for grabs here, and this is not quite the world or the version of this I was expecting. And the story, because we so quickly get an actual demon in a car, evil Knight Rider, evil Kit, and then it never let up from that point. It just sort of only picked up speed.
Yeah, definitely. I loved how gruesome it was at points. So when the car kills the priest.
Oh yeah.
And he rams him with the spike. It was just the spike that becomes flaccid when it's finished killing him as well. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's kind of there's a few, he's had some fun there, right? In that, I think it's one of those. Shall I leave that bit in? Yeah, I'm going to leave that in.
But yeah, I mean, there's a great piece of art in the illustrated version of that priest who just looks cool. He's got his shotgun in one. Yeah, it's great.
The artwork's amazing, really good.
Yeah, it's a really fun art. Far fewer pieces of art than the early.
It's Father O'Prey, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
there's some genuine. There's some names where there's a level of seriousness to it, but there's a lot of names where he's clearly gone, I'm going to have loads of fun with these names. And Father O'Prey.
Yeah. Yeah, and that sequence that's in the town of Welcome in Arizona, and you get the car just rampages through the town and then is eventually brought to a stop. But then our main characters later turn up in the town. We have a trooper who had survived that first encounter and has decided to pursue the car. And that's Trooper Stack, and he basically stays in the town, and then he is joined by a super nun spy who we get more information on later on. But Chantal, I'm not going to attempt her surname right now because I'm only going to mess it up.
You've already said it. You said it in the intro perfectly.
But yeah, so the two of them together, there's a really, really good scene when she first turns up. So Stack, he's knackered. He's had all of this stuff happen to him. He just wants to have some chili and a whiskey, and then he gets accosted basically by a gang of gas chuggers. This like group of outlaws essentially. And they have all great names.
Who drink petrol.
Yes, they drink petrol, and they have some fantastic names. The leader is called Exxon. There's all sorts.
There's Mobile, Shell.
Yes, and the Miss Unleaded is the sort of young girl who's with them. But the scene where they are talking to Stack and threatening him, that felt to me like a Tarantino scene.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the ratcheting up of the tension over the course of that sequence was just because we know he's going to die. There's no way Stack survives this
Yeah.
unless there's divine intervention, which there is. But he's outnumbered, he's outgunned, and it's just getting more and more and more tense. There's some really it's written very well, and there's some quite offensive language in it because the characters who are using it are offensive, horrible people. That sequence was great, and then Chantal steps in obviously and saves the day, and then you have a really cool action scene as a result. But yeah, I mean, what were your thoughts around Stack and Chantal as these sort of main characters that we get later on in the story?
It works really well because they're so different. When we meet Chantal quite early on, don't we? We want to slowly find out a bit about her throughout the book, and quite a lot with a big chunk in the book, which is quite a standout part of the book for it being different. But so we'll come back to her. But you see her at the beginning. You meet her at the U.S. cavalry Fort Apache, and she's kind of on official government business, for she's Swiss based, basically sanctioned op is what you know her from at the beginning, but she's also a nun, which you find out a little bit more about later on. And but there's a really nice difference in the characters because Stack's a US cavalryman, not even a sergeant, is he? Because Tyrone was the sergeant, so he's a sort of a normal trooper.
Right.
Who's obviously raw Western kind of guy, taken straight out of an 1870s Western, but for US cavalry. That even the uniforms they wear matches that look, and it's kind of protecting the convoys and the people out in these wild lands, which are kind of reformed now in this new dark future that we're in, where she is very European because she comes from Europe, and we get to experience Europe a little bit through her thinking back and looking back at her backstory. And Europe seems a lot more civilized, isn't it? A lot more the way we recognize the world.
Yes, some of Europe does.
Some of Europe does. Yeah, the bit of Europe we see through her feels very recognizable. So you've got these two very different personalities that work well together. Partly because she's just hard as nails, isn't she?
She's absolutely hard as nails. Yeah,
she is. Is she Dark Future? Is she his Genevieve in Dark Future? There's elements. There's elements of that. The kind of sultry, intelligent, almost superpowered. She doesn't have superpowers in this, but she's incredibly well trained.
Yeah.
There's a section. They sort of split into parts, isn't it? And it's one of the latest, part 6 is called Holy Orders. It's quite a long part when it's pretty much it tells you her backstory.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of, in a film, like the individual sections of her backstory, because it takes you a different time period from when she's a child, when she's a teen, when she's training to be a nun. You'd probably find those spread throughout a film. If it was a movie a little bit more, it would keep cutting. She'd be driving and she'd something a reminder about something, and there'll be little segments, but in the book it's done as one almost big mega chapter, isn't it, when you suddenly learn all this information. And it could have messed with the pacing of it all, but he just gets away with it. I think if it was a little bit longer it might have done. But you learn a lot about it. But you always find that nuns, Catholic nuns working for the Pope then are trained almost like warrior monks, aren't they? And so she's a mixture of a spy, special agent, an op, and a warrior nun working directly for the Pope, who's the mission she's on, and she's been basically sent on by the current Pope, who she's known since childhood because of her family connections and things. So backstory is very, very good. And you get that with Genevieve, don't you? Make this connection again, but you get that long backstory about when she was a child and how she became. And I feel like he's trying to do that here with this character a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I think that's a really good shout. This is definitely his sort of Genevieve equivalent. And all of that backstory sets her up really well for why she's so good and why she's able to do what she does throughout the rest of the story. I can imagine that we'll see her again and then that will play a further role. I hope we do, because I think she's a fun character and there's some really cool stuff there. That just bring to mind just another comparison to Drachenfels, I guess, because this novel is structured in a sort of similar way. and kind of approaches it in a similar kind of a way to Dragonfell's. This one is drawing on real pop culture and then a sort of imagined pop culture of what it could have been if America had collapsed in the 90s, more or less. So you get all of these sort of ridiculous references and actors playing characters who they didn't really play in real life and all this sort of stuff. And they're really fun. It just reminds me of all of the references, the pop culture references in Drakenfels to the Warhammer world. So where you're talking about like Taradash and what would have been the popular culture of the old world. And I just think it's quite interesting how Kim Newman, no matter what world he's in, no matter where he's writing, is able to sort of draw on the pop culture of that world to better tell a story in it. And I think that's actually a really fascinating
it's a really
approach.
good point. It is, and it's so clearly something he's very strong at doing, and he sees the power of when you build a world, making it seem relatable and realistic is to appeal to those kind of things. And you see a few other authors do it, mainly actually referring back to his characters, though. The amount of times Detlef Sierck gets mentioned in Gotrek and Felix, in later novels as well, quite a few times. So you see it in reverse. He's kind of given that to the other authors, and they're able to use that in terms of an empire perspective on things for a certain person. But yeah, absolutely, it works really well, and it's something that he does. It just makes it so believable, doesn't it? You could,
it does.
Maybe that's partly why some of this is you can imagine it, can't you? You can imagine how the world could. There'd be less tongue-in-cheekness about it, but some of the things that happen are things that you say without accidentally straining into politics. But you definitely see a lot of talk around power of corporations, don't you? Throughout this, and maybe that is something we've seen more and more since the time these books were written to now. It might be different corporations than they thought, and it might be tech corporations more now than oil ones or something. But you can definitely see that, and it's relatable because of it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And again, like the game overall, it feels quite prescient. There's a lot of stuff here that is a current concern that is further advanced than it was at the time. So yeah, it definitely, obviously we thankfully not at this point yet, but there definitely is a lot of stuff where you're like, wow, they were writing about this being the nightmare future 20 years ago, and we're only continuing down that same road. I mean, that's a real shame, isn't it? But I mean, in terms of the narrative, I think. I mean, you sort of see this happening early. You kind of get the sense this is what's going to happen. But Fort Apache that you mentioned, that is the target for the demon. So once it's done its business and it's like killed the priest, it's taken over the car, it then uploads itself into the church's internet and uses that to get into the fort and then start possessing the fort itself. And it does a lot of wild and very destructive stuff in the fort. And that then leads a load of people to basically lose their minds as a result. The leadership completely collapses, and you end up with some really, again, tense scenes where people are being given orders by a madman, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's really, really good stuff. And then you sort of end up with our heroes having to make their way into the fort in order to put a stop to the demon in it, to make sure it doesn't get any further along the network. I thought that was a really good escalation, and then led us to a really exciting climax within the confines of the fort as well.
Yeah, it was a really strong ending, wasn't it? And it's especially after the kind of that Holy Orders part where it was just I think one smaller sub chapter longer could have been too much, but I think it was perfect. And then it really starts to kind of build up the pace again at a really high level since then. And I love the stuff in the fort. I love that there's complete fear. It's chaos in there. People are dying in really, really nasty ways. When we, find, I forgot his name now. It dies in his kitchen, doesn't he?
The major, Brevet Major General Younger.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, so he was cooking, like he's cooking and things. And even when they come out of the lift and find him, and there's just bits of him everywhere. And the demons possessed all of these electrical appliances and just kind of his head's
his
in the
smart
microwave
appliances
blackened and stuff.
He's
smart.
His Alexa did it.
It's great, but it's kind of, they don't know what's going on, and people keep dying in different parts, and a lot of that's Lauderdale, but it's almost like The Thing, when they keep finding people dead and they don't know why. It's because the bug or such is it's not spreading in the same way, but it's that same kind of cabin fever. We're all stuck in here. We don't know who's going to die next. People going to bed scared, looking at the door, locking their doors and things, and it feels like there's no control. There's no way to get back, and the demon is just going to win. They haven't got the power to stop it, and you get that a little bit in the Thing, for a different reason, but that same kind of, we've got no power here. Eventually, we're just going to die one by one. And he's definitely got that kind of feeling that would have happened if it wasn't for the outsider interference of Chantal and Stack coming back to save the day.
Yeah, and you get, all that, the breakdown in hierarchy, that's quite scary, where people then are just following orders that they know are from someone who's just completely, essentially has gone mad as a result of all of this stuff that's happening.
Well, Rintoon was already had some issues anyway. It appears, doesn't it? So there was already a note saying that he did what, under any circumstances, he's not left in charge, and he's clearly falling apart to the point where he's just ordering people to be killed.
Yes.
And Lauderdale's clean people anyway, and quite enjoying when he gets told to kill someone extra, because there's summary executions going on everywhere, and all the slightly more junior officers and people there are just hang on, petrified that they're going to be next. It's it's good.
It's dark. Good. It's super dark, and we do end up with a couple of sort of parallel action scenes where Stack is being chased by robots out in the sort of in the sands. He gets saved by a mysterious figure. I have a sneaking suspicion I know who it is, but because of meta information, not because of anything that's in the text. So
okay,
I won't. We don't.
No idea.
Yeah, we don't need to get any further into that. But there's just this character who turns up, who is like has that feel of a lawman who steps in and saves the day, and then kind of rides off.
John Wayne character.
Yeah, very John Wayne sort of style. And then we get Chantal manages to cut down the system, and the demon has to download. We actually get the use of the name Demon Download in the text, which is always fun to do a little cheer when they say the words. And then the demon then does possess this Lauderdale. So the guy who has basically been pretty evil throughout has been secretly sacrificing people, egging on the general who's lost his mind to keep him in power and keep everything going bad. He then gets fully possessed, and then he's kind of
stuck then, isn't he? Because he can't go anywhere from that point.
The demon is trapped inside his body, and there's some really bleak stuff that kind of reminded me of the X-Files. Actually, again, this predates the X-Files, but where the demon sort of wants to make sure it's still kind of connected in some way. So it just physically starts putting bits of technology into this body it's possessed, just like shoving keyboards inside its like own stomach and stuff. It's grotesque. It's absolutely horrible. Yeah. Real body horror stuff. The Thing is a great reference point because it's that level of kind of body horror. And then you have that final showdown, essentially, where they have to fight it. And this was one of the only times we see Quinn Cannon, the sergeant who was also from the Route 666 story.
Yeah. You see him a little bit early on, don't you?
He's in the story. He doesn't really do anything. So again, it was quite interesting to then see him turn up at the end, and it kind of does just tie off that little thread from the short story, which I quite liked. He's not the main character. Like Tyree, he was not. That neither of them are the main character.
Just expands that.
It does. Its continuity is quite nice. Yeah. And then that they win, basically. They manage to defeat the demon and save the day. It's a happy ending, and Chantal goes off on her next mission.
All those left alive, it's a happy ending. There's a lot of
there's been a lot of damage, a lot of people lost. A load of missiles have been launched by the fort just at random into the surrounding areas. All sorts of collateral damage has been done. And we've kind of highlighted the vulnerabilities of the US cavalry as an organization, but then also the technology, how vulnerable all of that stuff is to demons.
Seth's still in place. He's still
and the big villain,
with his feet totally up in Deseret, and his this new population center now with people attracting people there.
Yeah, and we get a mention. So Elder Seth, the guy who sent the demon out in the first place, the arch villain, he turns up every now and again in the course of the story, but really this is not his story. This is just he's sent off a demon, and then we're seeing the demon's story essentially. But Seth also has an assassin on his payroll, a guy called Duroc. And we get a few little bits of information about him, and he's sent off on a mission at the end. So we know Chantal's going on a new mission. We know that Duroc is going on an evil mission. So it definitely sets the stage for where things could go next. And we know this is the start of the demon download cycle. So presumably there's going to be some direct continuation of what's happened here in future novels. So,
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it would wonderfully explore. So I was thinking as well, though, another King reference here, but I don't know if you've ever read or watched the Stand. So one of his most famous bigger stories. So there's lots of religious kind of undertone to it, and especially what happens after the world's population is reduced so much due to a mass virus. But you have sort of the good, the godly side of people, and you have the devil's side, and they kind of hole up in Vegas, and it's almost like the devil is drawing those people there, and it feels like Seth's almost got that kind of feel. He's out in the desert and he's drawing people to him, which is some people that will think they've got a fresh start, but they'll also maybe be attracting people who have maybe been the misfits or on the wrong side of things as well. And it's really, really interesting. I reckon anyone that hasn't read The Stand, I recommend it. It's fantastic. But it's definitely elements of that into it, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like Newman is a King fan, is the sense I get, right?
I don't know. It just might just be that there's good comparisons.
Yeah, but, maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was. Maybe it's just because I'm a fan of it, and I see that I can recognise style in there. But it might well be that there's just a similar kind of US story feel to it, and slightly supernatural feel to a lot of King stories, obviously, and a lot of those are set in a sort of 70s, 80s, 90s kind of US, aren't they? So that's recognizable in this.
We do get a couple of very brief name drops as well. So I think Khorne is mentioned, the Chaos God.
Yes, when they list, there's like loads and loads of different demons.
Yeah.
And Khorne's there, which is really interesting and cool.
Yeah.
Almost throwaways. It doesn't matter. So if you're not a Warhammer reader, makes no difference because it's just another list of different demon names. But if you are, you're like, that's cool.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. I thought that was a fun moment, especially considering that we know from Mark Gascoigne, the creator of the Dark Future setting, that there were always going to be those little hints of chaos from Warhammer and the 40k universe. So I'm quite keen on those little breadcrumbs that get left. That. It's just fun stuff. Like you say, it doesn't mean anything. I'm glad
it was I say real world demon, depends what your beliefs are, but I'm glad it's that rather than the Warhammer stuff. I actually prefer it this way. I prefer it being more of a real world future thing.
So I
don't mind Khorne being mentioned, but I think I connect with the story, enjoy it more because it's more like a future Earth rather than an alternative future Earth, but there was linked to the Warhammer world in some way. I think
that's interesting. Yeah. So what if because obviously the Josephites, there's a bit of like Mormon sort of religion in there, but obviously it's a heightened like evil.
It's all got connections with real religion.
Yes. Absolutely.
Or religious beliefs.
Yes.
In the real world, hasn't it?
Would you not have liked that if that was so? Let's imagine they weren't Josephites; they were Khornate cultists.
Would I have liked it? I think I prefer it this way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know unless I could read two different versions of it, which,
course, yeah.
but I think if I was given the choice, I would have said, no, let's make it like this because I quite like this.
Sure.
But like I've said, I like this kind of genre of story anyway.
Yeah.
I think
One
it's
thing I
good
would have
anyway.
loved, I think, is to see, because I think that the novel is great. I think it's a very cool setting. It builds on what we've seen of Dark Future so far in the game and in the anthology, and then adds a lot to it that is value adding material. So the
Yeah.
demons and the religion and all of that sort of stuff, even the US cavalry and the way they're described, the sort of the more cyberpunky elements of the world, they were all they all can fit in what we've seen to date, but they're not focused on very much in what we've seen elsewhere. And I think it's a shame that we didn't get more of this in the game itself.
Mm.
Because there's no demons, or we don't have the sort of warrior nun character that Chantal is
Yeah.
represented in the game. I mean, you
Would
could
they have
do
got
it,
away
but
with that in
well,
late 1980s? Would they have got away
I
with
mean,
that? I
they
can
were able to
imagine
put it
some
into a
people.
book.
I think novel is a little bit. I think you can probably get away with more in a novel than you could in a
Potentially.
game, especially that you're trying to sell to potentially a younger age group than you are the novels.
I mean, this novel is definitely there. It is an older crowd, I think, than most of the GW
Mm.
books we've read so far, right? This feels like it's
Yeah.
for a more mature audience,
Yes,
and would have raised a
definitely.
few eyebrows because of
Oh
its level
yeah,
of
yeah,
gore
yeah. And
and
I can imagine people probably even now would find it offensive.
yes, there will be some, yeah,
Especially some people, depending on I think it'd be often related to people's own religious beliefs. So I think
sure.
they would find blasphemous in some ways.
Mm.
But we are talking about the Catholic Church here with warrior nuns.
Sure.
Um, so some people won't like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I think to put that into a tabletop game would have been
Yeah, yeah, I'd not
potentially
considered
tricky
that.
now, to be honest with you,
Even
because
then, I think you could have done more with the demons and the sort of
don't get me
the
wrong, I
supernatural elements.
would have been brilliant. I'd have liked to have
Yeah.
seen it, but you just don't see that tackled a lot. Is it tackled a little bit with Trench Crusade coming out at the
Yeah, I
moment?
think there's aspects of that in
But I'm
there.
not sure.
Sure.
Can you think of another game that leans into
Um,
that?
I mean,
Do they kind of play safer with that Cthulhu-esque style of thing, or you'll get that alternative weird war quite often,
sure.
but you don't tend to find it
I'm trying to remember
a
it if you get
religious war kind of thing, unless
much
it's a
in like Vampire the
historical war game.
Masquerade, potentially.
I'm not that familiar with it, but maybe.
I feel like
Um,
there's more aspects of because it's a lot of human history in there as well, isn't there, and stuff
yeah,
like that. And yeah, some of the like horror games that tackle dark matter, for instance, does
mm.
have various real religious organizations that have been given a sort of conspiracy flavor
Yeah,
instead.
and that might be the problem. I think you might get away with it if it was set in the 15th century, but you wouldn't get away with it the same way without
Mm.
people. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would play it and have no problems with it, but I think there would be some people that wouldn't like it. Whereas you make it a medieval witch hunt type thing and have priests and demons, and all, people would accept that. But I still think, especially in the 1980s Britain, I think they
Yeah,
would have been brave to bring out what would have, because it was so dominating. You can't have demons in the biblical demon, that religious story demons in the world,
mm.
um, in such a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of
Yeah,
way. You
true.
either make it serious, where the good guys win and make a film out of it. Would be that a well-known series of stories by us, um, or you, I don't know. I, I wonder if that would have been the reason why they would have thought we can't really lean into that. It would have been brilliant, but would it have been
Yeah,
a
I think
problem?
there's yeah. In any case, I think Dark Future as a game still is fun,
Mm.
and I think that this novel is fantastic. I think there's just so much good stuff in it. It was compelling reading, and it really does. It goes at quite a clip as well. I think
Mm.
it's exciting to read.
Super easy read.
Yeah, Yeah, in a
And
good
that's
way.
not because it was simple in any way, just because it was just well constructed, it flowed well, and then like you said, the pace of it just kept you going, and then the way it's presented with all of those the 8 parts, but then the sub chapter parts, it was very easy to kind of
Yeah.
read a couple of
You feel like
pages
you're
and
making
pause.
progress all the time as well.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can pop your bookmark in and think I can go back to that, and you don't feel like I've lost my train of thought because each of the sections was
Yeah.
relatively short. It's just super easy to work through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to where it goes next, because I think there is another Jack Yeovil story. When we are in our books club, GW Books Club, leaving Dark Future for a little while. But when we come back to it, it's going to be with Crocodile Tears or Crocodile Tears, which is the next Jack Yeovil. So I'm excited to see where the story goes off of the
I'm
back of
excited to
this.
try and get hold of that book because that's the one that's eluded me so far. So if anyone does know of a copy knocking around, then
Well, I
then
mean,
get in touch.
I was lucky, I think, because Demon Download was the last one of the original GDB books that I needed to get hold of. So I've now been able to secure first editions of the whole lot. So I'm very, very pleased with that. And this one that I got actually has a Kim Newman signature in it. So
Amazing.
very exciting. Yeah, yeah, really fun to have that. It was in pristine condition, and it's not quite anymore because I've read it. I did my best to keep it keep it looking good, but it's got a few corners have taken a bit of damage. But yeah, as a book, as an adventure, as a story in Dark Future, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was really, really good fun. It was dark. It was funny. There was some great horror. There was some great action, and it poses enough questions for the sort of rest of the series to have some really fun stuff that I can't wait to explore.
Yeah, I just completely agree with all of that. It was very well summed up.
I mean, so I'm going to take it from that you are going to give this one a thumbs up rather than a thumbs down.
Absolutely, he says, knocking his microphone. Yeah, absolutely. It's if I look back at the list again to remind myself to make sure I'm not missing anything, I think that's comfortably in the top 2.
Ooh, okay. I mean, it's definitely high for me. It's definitely high. I think I've enjoyed some of the anthologies and some of the individual stories enough to kind of give me pause to think. It definitely doesn't best Drakenfels for me.
Right.
But it's in contention.
With you. I'm probably with you. It's probably Drakenfels than this.
Yeah.
Now, if we split up all the anthologies and our individual stories, it gets a lot more complicated. But
Yes,
I'm discounting that because I'm looking at the entire compilations. As you know me, I'm a little bit addicted to my Gotrek and Felix stuff. But if I keep them as they are, as their anthologies, then this is definitely number 2. And I think I just prefer full-length novels to short stories anyway.
Yeah, that's understandable.
This is very good.
But yeah, we're heading next into the 41st millennium. So we're going to be reading the first of the 40K books that was published by Games Workshop. So yeah, Deathwing. Very excited. Then another anthology of stories. This one's got some big names in. So we've got the first Ian Watson story in there as well.
Never read them, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, William King, Brian Ansell himself contributed. So yeah, lots of fun stuff to look forward to, and to get that very early 40K flavor.
Yes, it's going to be interesting, I think.
So I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I think in the meantime, if anybody wants to find you, Stu, they can do that online. Where can they get hold of you?
Miniature Realms, just Miniature Realms for everything. The easiest way will be YouTube because you're watching this on YouTube. Check my channel out. Other than that, yeah, you can catch me on all social media as well.
Fantastic. And I'll put some links in the description below. There's also got mine there as well. We've both got Patreons, we've both got Discords that people can check out and sort of have a look at. And you can join us in a month's time for Deathwing. And we're going to be getting into that and exploring that. We might see if we can do a couple of other little bonus book club episodes at some point as well, if we can find the time. I won't say too much more about those, but they're quite exciting. I'm looking forward to reading some other books from the history of Games Workshop that we're going to try and squeeze in if we can, I think, aren't we, Stu?
That's the plan. Yeah, absolutely. I may have already read one of them a few times, but
fantastic. Well, I think let's leave it there. And if you want to join us next time for Deathwing, then you've got roughly a month to read it. Until then, I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.